you started coming up with them, it wasn't easy to stop. Because wasn't it possible that the king might even be grateful to her for the bombshell she was about to drop, especially as his younger brother's wife had recently given birth to a son? The world's press had fanfared the birth of an heir to the fabulous Mediterranean kingdom. But Melissa knew that wasn't true. Because Ben was the heir. The true heir. She cleared her throat. When we did that museum party in London for the touring exhibition of the Zaffirinthos marbles, Casimiro was there. And at the after-show party. Surely you remember. Sure I do. Stephen screwed up his eyes. You helped me hand out the canapes that night, Mel. I doubt whether you actually engaged him in any conversation other than, "Would you like another hors d'oeuvre, Your Majesty?" And if you're expecting him to remember you from back then, you'd better think again. Melissa gave a brief, nervous smile. Of course her boss wouldn't have noticed. For there had been no chemistry or eye contact between the party planner's assistant and the eligible king during what had been just another glittering socialite gathering. You would hardly expect the guest of honour to engage in light-hearted banter with a woman who was there simply to serve the privileged throng. And yet what would Stephen say if he knew just what the king had said to her the very next night, when she had been cold and empty and aching for some human comfort? Something along the lines of how criminal it was for her to wear panties at all. And then he had proceeded to remove them with a dexterity which, when coupled with a passionate kiss, had made any argument against his love-making completely futile. But Stephen was clearly oblivious to the fact that she had become intimate with the man who ruled the prosperous Mediterranean island of Zaffirinthos. He had no idea that Casimiro was Ben's father. In fact, neither did her aunt, who was looking after Ben back in England at this very moment. No one did. Not even Casimiro himself. It was a terrible, aching secret she had been forced to keep to herself. But soon she would be free of the intolerable burden. "And people are still concerned about the king's health, of course," continued Stephen thoughtfully. At this, Melissa stilled. He's not ill. Ill? He's the fittest man I've ever seen, which is a miracle when you stop to think about it, said Stephen reflectively. You know he nearly died the year before last, don't you? Despite the warmth of the late May evening, Melissa couldn't suppress the shiver which Stephen's words produced as they took her back to that terrible time. A time which had been like a living hell. Of course she knew that Casimiro had nearly died. Hadn't she sat awake for hours watching the 24-hour news channel, wide-eyed and weary from lack of sleep, as she'd waited for bulletins which had told her very little? "The king is fighting for his life," had been the one grim and enduring announcement which had made her recognize that she couldn't keep burying her head in the sand. And hadn't Casimiro's eventual recovery spurred her into action, slamming home the realization that she must tell him about his baby? Even if she'd failed in her attempts to contact him before, because kings were pretty much unreachable to people like her, this time she must. She must. For Ben was more than just a beautiful little boy she adored with all her heart. He was the progeny of a king, heir to a royal kingdom. And didn't they both have a right to know that? He fell off his horse, didn't he? She questioned, a fact she already knew. Actually, about the only fact she knew about the accident, though perhaps Stephen could tell her more. Landed on his head, reckless fool. Was in a coma for weeks. But he's all right now. Apparently. Though one of his staff was indiscreet enough to tell me that the king's initial relief at his full recovery has given way to a cold demeanour which makes most of them quake. This was not what Melissa wanted to hear. She wanted to hear that Casimiro was the sunniest person on the planet, that he would smile on her with delight when she grabbed an opportune moment to tell him her earth-shattering news, and tell her that she wasn't to